Oh my goodness, that was an awkward transition. Sometimes they don't go as smoothly as I like. Welcome to the Dr. Sem Yankee Show. Today is Saturday, August the 30th. It's actually my mom's birthday. So, Mom, happy 86th birthday. It's also not as important as my mom, but it's also the birth date of Ted Williams, who happens to be my dad's favorite baseball player. The fact that he met my mom, who was born on Ted Williams's birthday, has always been something I've wondered. Did he fall in love with my mom because she shared a birthday with Ted Williams? I don't think so. He loves my mom amazingly. He loves my mom more than anything in the world. I have the greatest parents ever. But it is true that my dad did love Ted Williams first. He fell in love with Ted Williams all the way back in 1946, and he didn't marry my mom and didn't even meet her until high school, and he didn't marry my mom until 1962. So maybe just a coincidence. But happy birthday, Mom. Hello, my friends. Let's make today a great day. And how can you make your day great? It's simple. You look around at all the wonderful things in the world and you appreciate them. And when you see things that are great and you appreciate them, you can't help but have a wonderful day. But let's say for some reason you can't find anything good, which I think would be almost impossible, but nothing is good. Nothing at all is good. Well, then do something nice for somebody else. Go to a neighbor's house. Donate some time. Do something nice for a community organization. Write a letter to a friend. Say happy birthday to someone who's having a birthday. And then all of a sudden there's goodness. And then you have something to say, you know what? Today's a great day because I created some goodness. Remember, when we give love and kindness, it comes back to us in greater amounts than we ever gave. And let me also remind you that this program is brought to you by Artemisia Publishing. Artemisia, a fantastic publisher who publishes books in a variety of genres. Some of the greatest books ever written, including my wonderful novel, Scattering the Ashes, the award-winning The Least Among Them, the also award-winning From Compton to the Bronx, written by Roy White and me, and my motivational book, 365.2. So go to Artemisia Publishing at apbooks.net. And of course, you can see this program and all of our podcasts and tons of great Yankee news every single day. We put up brand new articles every day at 6 a.m., 10 a.m., and 2 p.m. Plus, we have a game thread. No one else brings you the Yankees as well as start spreading the news. My dear friends, one way to make your day great is to make new friends. And I have two wonderful friends here today. We're not going to talk about Yankees. We're going to talk about a great book called Boot Hill Boy. It is Mark Littell's final book. Mark Littell pitched for the Royals and he pitched for the St. Louis Cardinals. And we have the two people who helped make this final book become a reality, H.R. Ryan and Ethan Sargent. So we'll welcome them to the show here. Hello, H.R. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Paul. How are you?
It's great. It's great to see you. And here's Ethan. Ethan, how are you?
Doing great. Love the energy. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Ethan, you know, Mark Littell pitched in the 70s and 80s. So why don't you tell us a little who he was? Who is Mark Littell?
Mark was a product of the Boot Hill in Gideon, Missouri is where he grew up. He had a lot of time in St. Louis at the end of his career, and he was drafted by the Kansas City Royals. And if you look at his baseball reference numbers, he had some great years with both clubs. And I got to know Mark when I was a young boy. He stumbled into my grandfather's antique shop. My grandmother and grandfather both owned an antique shop. My grandfather was an artist and really into log cabins and building log homes. And Mark was interested in building a log home, so they became fast friends. And Mark became part of our family very quickly. So I grew up with Mark and had a lot of great adventures with him.
And he actually ended up building a home, did he not?
He did. In Defiance, Missouri, my dad helped design it, and Mark was involved from the foundation to the roof. And every step along the way, he had a guy come up from the southern Missouri and do the log hewing was what it's called. You take a round log, you make it square, and it's a beautiful log home. It's still standing today. I think it was recently purchased by another person that's enjoying Mark's work, and it's an amazing piece of property. And but the log home stands to this day. So 1820 style of Midwestern log home, German like settler type of log home.
Oh, that's awesome. So can you tell us a little also about his career as a baseball player?
Sure. I think that Mark came up very young. I think he was maybe 19 years old when he came up in 1973, 20 years old. And then I don't think the Royals really knew what to do with him. He started some games. He finished some games. He had a couple complete games along the way early in his career. And then in 1976, he came up, pretty much took over the role of the closer, kind of an early closer in Whitey's career as a manager, and pitched a lot of innings, had 3 years, over 100 innings pitched out of the bullpen. So it's a lot different than the years since then, as far as the closer's role, kind of a, Mark played with Bruce Sutter, and those are the type of guys that would come in 2 or 3 innings and close the book on a game. So that's what Mark did, and pitching 100 innings. And then crazy is they would sprinkle in some games, some starters along the way. So not only were you closing, but if there was a doubleheader, you might get the start in the second game in San Francisco. So
amazing.
I think Mark had some distinctions, and one of them was that I think he lost 2 games within 24 hours and won 2 games within 24 hours, something crazy like that, where Mark was pitching on both ends of the rubber as far as starting and closing games, which is hard to imagine today.
HR, how did you become friendly with Mark to be the person who helped him bring his his fourth and final book to print?
Well, I was working on a baseball novel myself, and so I was on a lot of baseball groups on Facebook and just picking up, lingo and general vibes and getting back into the sport because I had been away from it for a few years. And I noticed his name pop up, and I thought, that sounds familiar. Didn't I see him pitch for the Cardinals when he was with the Mets in the 70s? And so I looked him up, and yes, it was the same Mark Littell. And it turned out that he was posting little excerpts from his books. And I thought, wow, he's actually a pretty good writer. So I bought his books and I read his books, and I thought, well, this guy is really, really good. So I reached out to him on Facebook, and we started up a chat and conversation. And he said that he wrote all his books himself and didn't have any sort of ghostwriter or anything doing it for him. He just sat down and wrote them. And so I thought that was really impressive. And he started to send me excerpts from the book that he was working on in 2022 when I met him. And he would do this with friends that he thought were good readers, people who would be able to give critical comments. He would send out drafts of his stories to people and have them respond and tell them what they liked about it. And so he started doing that with me with some of his stuff. And I just made like little copy editing suggestions, and then I made a couple of other suggestions, and all of a sudden he was just like treating me like his editor. So he was sending me stuff, and we were getting together and like working on these pieces together. So that's how that happened. And he was just a really fun guy to work with. He was really very personable and easy to talk to, and we really had a fun time doing all that.
Now, I read the book. I just read it last week. I also read his first book, which when you and I talked a couple of years ago, this wasn't even out yet. You had sent me. One of the amazing things about the book is, let's see how much of it is, because it's just I have to show this. I should have bookmarked this. This much of the book. All right, so it's about half. Is recollections from Mark's teammates, from people he coached with, from people who were his friends, from people who were on other teams, some people who are famous, some people who are less famous, a couple of Hall of Famers, including Whitey Herzog and Jim Cott. And all of them talk about how Mark wrote without a ghostwriter, and he did all this work himself, and he just a common phrase in all of those tributes when they mention his writing is he's a writer that's almost like a modern day Mark Twain. He's so down to earth, and he's folksy, and he's interesting, and he's funny. Peter Golenbach, who wrote the an introduction to the book, mentions that too. The humor is there. You don't even know what you're going to see on the next page. It's unpredictable. Were you amazed, HR, how approachable he was? Here he is, a former Major League Baseball player, and he just immediately, and everybody keeps talking about that too. Like he was just someone who you could talk to, and he would instantly be your friend.
Yeah, I was very amazed, and I thought, well, this is like a Major League guy who's just chatting and being a normal person and talking about movies and food and all this stuff. And he was just a really open, engaging individual. And I heard later, after he passed away, from people who had become friends with him online, said that he would call them up. Like, one guy was in the hospital, and he called him up and gave him a nice cheery conversation and just wanted to chat. And he had this really like open, outgoing behavior. I don't know if he was always like that. Ethan can delineate that a little further, what he was like when he was younger. He might have gotten more open as he got older and more willing to talk to people. But for the year that I knew him, he was really very easy to work with and talk to. And he also seemed to have like your philosophy of doing good for people and being kind of a ray of sunshine, where he was able to do that. And that I really got that sense from him, was that if he could help someone else out, he would do that without asking for anything. So
I agree, that comes through. I never met him. I can only agree based on how the book reads and all those tributes from all those people. So Ethan, how old were you when you met Mark?
I was about 6 years old. So Mark,
my goodness,
larger than life. He was like getting to meet a Major League Baseball player when you're 6 years old and baseball crazy, and loved the Cardinals. And we had some really good teams in the early 80s leading up to the 82 World Series championship. So I went to a lot of games and listened to a lot of games on KMOX growing up. We didn't have a lot of games on the television. We did have some on Channel 11. And looking back through the archives, we'd see pictures of, we would see Mark on television, and we would take a picture of him with our camera. It was such a different time. But, Mark was always outgoing. He was a people person, very big energy. Whenever Heather would call, Mark would just light up and get excited because he knew that he wanted to get this book done. He had a lot of time and a lot of, he really invested himself into these books, and they were kind of his calling card. And Mark really enjoyed hearing what people thought about his writing. And whenever I read Mark's books, I can hear his voice in my head. It's like he's narrating it, and it's very interesting because it's like Mark is there in the room, and I miss that a lot. So whenever I pick up the book and read along, I think, wow, Mark's with us still.
We live on through our words, right? And that's beautiful. I love hearing that. So HR, you reached out to him because you were writing a baseball novel, and you wanted the baseball perspective from someone who's lived it. How's that novel coming?
Well, it's coming along pretty well, actually. I put it aside for the 3 years that it took to put this book together, because I couldn't really focus on that while I had this book on my mind. So I've just started again this summer, actually, to get back to it. And he was actually pretty helpful with it. I asked him to help me because the main character in the book is very similar to him in some odd ways, which it was kind of like life imitating art, And so I said, this guy is kind of similar to you, and it's set around that same kind of time frame. So maybe you could help me out with, just like what it was like to play at that time of in baseball history. And, and he said, yeah, sure. Whatever I can do, just let me know. And I sent him a big chunk of it to look over. And when we started talking about it, I thought that he would answer like a list of bullet point questions, like, when do you when and how do you find out if you're invited to spring training and all that kind of like technical stuff. But instead he started to get into this whole like narrative thing about, like the story and the drama and the characters and all this stuff. So I'm like, okay, whatever, we'll just go with that. I mean, I'm happy that you're into it like that. So that was really helpful.
I believe in the book, there's a piece there where you say he shared with you some stories that he didn't want to actually write about his old teammates, but some things that actually happened in real life that could be part of a novel because it'd be a different character possibly doing a similar thing. Correct?
Right. He would tell me all kinds of stories about all the people that, everyone knows. And I'd say, you really should put some of this in one of your books. And no, I can't put anything like that in, as you know, Jim Bouton, all that kind of stuff. So I said, all right, I understand. And even there were some incidents that didn't reflect poorly on anybody, but he didn't want to say anything bad about anybody in print. But he said, but you can use this for your novel. This is why I'm telling you all this stuff. You can take it and use it. And I'm like, all right. So I'll do that. There was one really great story about a fight. They had a lot of fights in those days, if you remember.
I do. A Yankee fan. I remember Greg Nettles and George Brett getting into a big altercation at third base.
He talked about those. He also talked about fights between teammates, and there was one on an airplane, the team plane, which was really quite dramatic. I was gripping. It was this gripping story he was telling me. I said, "You've got to write this down." And he's like, "Yeah, well, you go along and do." And I actually looked it up. I found out some corroborating facts, so it is a real story. But yeah, that was pretty dramatic. So that's going in the book somewhere.
Oh, fantastic. I admire that about Mark. I don't want this to become about me, but when I wrote the book with Roy White, Roy, it's really Roy's book that I just wrote. They're all his stories. Oh, thank you. But he's also a very classy person, and you cannot find anything negative in the book because that's not what he wanted to do. And as I always understood the story, the New York writers always wanted Roy White to write a book. He played with Mickey Mantle and Reggie Jackson and Billy Martin and George Steinbrenner, and there's lots of controversy in all those years, Thurman Munson and all that. But Roy never wanted to be a guy who, like Jim Bouton, and I love Jim Bouton's book, but never wanted to be that type of person who told stories out of school. And Mark Littell seems to be that, or was that same kind of person, which I believe is very admirable because there are things that you can share and there's things that's nobody's business. But the stories themselves might be funny. You could share them maybe with a friend or give them to another author to put her own touch on so that it can be part of a novel, but it's not attached to, whoever that other person, whoever that teammate was. So I think that's terrific.
Yeah, that really struck me too. In his demeanor, he didn't like to say negative things about people. I mean, I think Ethan will probably corroborate that.
Yeah, Mark was not about tearing down at all. He was very much a coach. So Mark would always be in coach mode. So after he was done with his major league career, maybe 9 years later, he started coaching the minor leagues. And Mark always had that instinct. He did a lot of coaching in St. Charles County, where I grew up. He'd have baseball camps in the summer, and he'd bring in different ball players, Ron Hunt, Ken Reitz, and some other guys that would come out to these baseball camps. And it was kind of before they were a big deal like they are now. Mark was running very dynamic and really good baseball camps for kids that would never have the opportunity to have a Major League Baseball eyeball on them. And Mark took that serious as far as his outlook on life, as far as helping to build up people.
Yeah, he told a story that ended up in the book being told by the man who went with him to Cuba for this. They were supposed to bring a bunch of American college baseball players down to Cuba for this jaunt, and it didn't work out, and all kinds of bad stuff happened. And so Mark started to write this piece, and he couldn't finish. He couldn't get through it and couldn't finish it. So I just had notes on it, and then I spoke with Bill Franciscus, who was the gentleman who was with him, and he told me he wrote this piece about what happened on the Cuba trip, where the guy who organized the trip was not trustworthy, and so they got into real hot water, and it all worked out okay, but it was just one of these gory detail stories. And I noticed that I think maybe that was one of the reasons Mark didn't really want to feel like finishing the piece, because it was so fraught with negativity dealing with this crooked guy. He felt that it had to be told, but he didn't really feel like doing it himself. So, and he was always it really hurt him to say something bad about somebody like this guy who ran the trip. So
now, as I recall, he gave that guy a nickname. I think it's Al Capone.
Al Capone, yeah, right.
So he tells the story.
With some good nicknames, right?
Yeah, but he tells the story, but he doesn't tell the person's name, and you can't really see it. I'm holding up one of the photographs. This is like the dugout.
That's what they had set up for them. They thought they were going to be meeting with the Cuban national team and playing in the big stadium and all this stuff. And they got this place where, like the old guy had to bring out goats to mow the field. And so it was quite a dramatic. He wanted to tell the story, I think, because it was so funny with all these little vignettes of strange things happening. But it was just he couldn't really muster up the energy to do it because he'd have to talk about this guy Capone. So I let Bill Franciscus tell the story. But anyway, yeah, he seemed to be a very upbeat kind of guy, and I think he had to deal with a lot of adversity in his life in various ways. And I think somehow he managed to get through it by keeping this positive outlook and trying to build people up and trying to be positive with other people. And even though he had a really rough time with injuries and with the Chambliss home run and all that kind of stuff, that kind of
you brought it up. You opened the door.
I
oh boy! All right, so I'm going to have to bring it up. Mark Littell was the guy who threw the pitch that Chris Chambliss hit for the home run. 1976, the Yankees go to the playoffs. The Royals lose. First time the Yankees are the Yankees go to the World Series. First time since 1964. First of 3 years that the Yankees and the Royals battled it out. Yankees beat the Royals every one of those years. Mark was not on all of those teams at that point. Mark does become a world champion. He's on the 1982 St. Louis Cardinals, so he gets his just desserts in the end. But like Ralph Branca or Ralph Terry or a couple other guys who've given up big time home runs. And I think maybe Ethan can talk to this because he spent almost his whole lifetime with Mark Littell, without sharing any of the colorful language, Ethan, that Mark might use when people would ask him about that. I think he had a great response because it must be annoying for the rest of your life since 1976 to have people say, "Hey, how about Chambliss?" I mean, but so how did Mark respond to that?
I remember one time I was in the California League with Mark, and I was probably 15 years old, and we were on a road trip and staying in a hotel, all the ball players, Mark's the pitching coach, and Bruce Bochy was the manager of this team, and everybody had ESPN on, and they were doing some kind of highlight reel of dramatic moments in baseball, and sure enough, here comes Mark throwing the pitch to Chambliss. And I look at Mark, he looks at me, and the phone starts ringing. And so Mark's like, yeah, that was great. God bless America type of moment. And Chambliss got me. But the big thing is that Mark was in the game and Mark was in the arena. If I went back and I listened to the radio broadcast recently of that game, and they were throwing batteries at Hal McCrane, the outfield, and Whitey probably would say, if you asked him today if he could answer it, he'd say, I should have pulled the guys off the field. There's a famous picture of Mark pitching to Chambliss, and there's a smoke behind home plate. So it was definitely a tough environment to be pitching. Mark was keeping warm on the mound, and then all of a sudden, first pitch, Chambliss jumps on it, and it's out of the game, out of the ballpark, and the game is over. So it was a lot of moments that led up to that big moment in Yankee history. And Mark was in the arena, and I think that's what Mark would say, is that he was there and he was playing to win, and all those guys were tough. All those players, I think Mark would say that everybody was ready to play ball and fight to the end. I think Mark only gave up one home run that 76 season leading up to the playoffs, and that was over 100 innings pitched. So that was just not really what was supposed to happen, but the Yankees made it happen.
And I love that answer. Right over here on my wall, I have a plaque that was given to me by some teachers in my school. I'm a retired principal. I would begin every school year and end every school year with that Theodore Roosevelt quote.
Oh, really? The one that he used?
Absolutely. Yes, it's in the book.
Sure.
Yep, in the arena quote. You do not want to be like those cold and timid souls who know neither victory or success or victory or defeat.
Yep.
And I'm a college professor, and I talk about that on my first day with my classes. I have my first classes tomorrow night. This is airing on Saturday, so it was Thursday night, but you get the idea. And I will start with that too. Like, you have to be in the arena. I love how Mark talks about that in his book. And I love the idea, sometimes he used in the book colorful language, but like sometimes some of his little younger kids, if he's coaching them, they thought, oh, I found something out. And you're like, hey, at least I was there. At least I was there. I'm a major leaguer. Like, yeah, somebody's going to give up a home run sometimes. But HR, you have a great story that you learned from Whitey Herzog about that home run. If one thing didn't happen, that ball doesn't go out, correct?
Right. He talks about that in his in the piece that he narrated to me that I put together for the book. He wanted to tell the whole story from the beginning of what happened. So you got to read the book to find out the details. But basically, he made a player switch in the outfield, which he, I think, regretted later because he got someone who was shorter and not able to reach that ball. And it really just, and Jim Walford also mentions it in his piece. He says that he saw it hit and he knew that it was going to be, like out because they put that short porch in. And so he just started running off the field. But perhaps if he had left in the guy who was taller, he might have caught it. But it was, there's no taking it away from Chambliss. I mean, and Mark didn't want to do that either. If you read the first book, as you did, you notice that he gave it all to Chambliss and basically said, you were a great hitter and you hit the ball right. And Chambliss wrote a little piece too for that, explaining what his perspective was. So it wasn't a cheap home run by any means. But one thing that I think people don't really realize, because you keep seeing the clip over and over again, and unfortunately, when Mark passed away, that was what everyone reacted to. They all said, "Oh, yeah, the guy who gave up the home run to Chris Chambliss," and they put the clip on all these little, obits. And I thought, well, that's really a hell of a thing to do, But apparently there was a break because everyone was throwing stuff on the field. So he went out to pitch and then they had to stop playing for like 10, 15 minutes or some lengthy period of time while they kind of tried to figure out what to do with the crowds and the people throwing things. And then they resumed play. And then right after that, he threw the pitch that Chambliss hit. So it seemed like it wasn't just that he came in and threw. He came in and warmed up, and then he hesitated and waited. They wanted to see if they were if Whitey would pull people off the field or if the umpires would pull people off the field, and they didn't. So, but yeah, I wanted to mention something about the home run. This is a weird story. He wanted to write this piece, which ended up being the final piece in the book, the one where he quotes Teddy Roosevelt, because for the last years of his life, he lived in South Dakota, North Dakota. Right?
North Dakota, yeah.
I'm from New York. I can't tell them apart. Anyway, wherever Teddy Roosevelt was eventually. And he really liked Teddy Roosevelt, and he lives in the same town where they have the Teddy Roosevelt Museum and the Teddy Roosevelt State Park and all this stuff. So he also read a lot of history. So he wanted to weave that into the story of how he felt about the Chambliss home run. In the first book, he was really kind of just matter of fact, that this is what happened. But in this book, he wanted to convey how it's, I don't really want to say it's hurtful to hear about this, but he wanted to remind fans that hearing about it all the time kind of wears you down. Mm-hmm. And so it's like an ongoing, he was not a self-pitying kind of guy, but he wanted to get that point across that it was something that he held with him throughout his life.
And yeah, right, because people think, oh, I'm going to be the first guy to bring it up.
Right.
Right. I've heard it enough, my good friends. Thank you. And
he told me one story, which I'll tell you off the record, but he said he would, on the phone, he would just blurt out these stories one after the other, and then he'd switch gears and talk about other things. But he said several years after he retired, he was at some sort of an event. I'm not sure. I can't remember now if it was at a card show or one of these things where you get a lot of the old retired ball players together and they're all signing autographs or doing something. And he saw a guy who was his contemporary, and there was recognition, and he's walking towards the guy, and the guy we would all know this guy's name. And he came up and he said, "You lost me a lot of money when you threw that pitch." And Mark said he just stood there and he didn't know whether to take a swing at the guy or walk away. And so he walked away. But I thought, wow, who is this guy? And he told me, but I haven't been able to get any backup information on where it was or anything about it. And it's just such a volatile thing, because it turns out the guy was not. My first reaction was that he was on the Royals and somehow it shorted him out of the pennant money or something. That was my first reaction. But it turns out he wasn't with the Royals. So that
interesting.
Makes the plot thick, right?
Yes,
so
it does.
All these little little vignettes that you hear about, and you're like, And there was a lot of betting and a lot of other stuff happening that wasn't really legit. So anyway, that was an interesting story to me, because it indicated that there are all these different reactions within baseball. I mean, you hear people say, "Oh, it's just part of the game," blah 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 blah. But I mean, there are people who hold all these, harbor all these resentments for various reasons.
100%. Listen, this has been terrific. The time goes too quickly. Why don't you tell us about the book quickly, where we can get it? Here is the title. HR, tell us all about it so people can get their copies.
Well, I think if you go to Amazon and search on Mark Littell, Boot Heel Boy, it will come up. There's a whole page of Mark's books, and you can. I suggest that you read all 4 of them in succession, because they are rather chronological, and they're he tells interesting stories in each one, and they're all fun and a great read. The third one, What's Up Ramrod, is about his minor league coaching experiences, which are really fun.
And he was in Australia for part of that.
And part of Australia, the first part is when he's in Australia having other experiences with kangaroos and cassowaries and all kinds of stuff.
That's awesome. Thank you, HR. Thank you, Ethan, for being part of this. We're going to talk more about this book, and maybe we can have HR and Ethan on again, but Jim Wolford's name was mentioned by HR. I talked to him about a week ago. He is very enthusiastic about coming on. I've reached out to another teammate through HR, Ray Burris, who was a Yankee very briefly, I think in 1979. And he expressed an interest in talking about the book as well. So we can talk about this book a number more times, and I look forward to it because it is a fun read. Boot Hill Boy by Mark Littell, edited by H.R. Ryan. My dear friends, thank you for watching. Make every day great. Give love. It will come back to you always in greater amounts than you gave. Have a wonderful, wonderful